I'm Matt Reynolds, and this is my podcast.
I can do the job, but running the business is quite difficult. What a lot of tradesmen lack, and I was probably one of them, is business skills.
I don't mind making mistakes. You learn from your mistakes.
Information is all around you in the minds of people that work beside you.
This is episode 24 of Trench Talk. I'm Matt Reynolds. I'm a plumber from Melbourne, Australia, and author Roland Lazenby is back for this one. The idea of these discussions, for those of you joining us for the first time, is to go into the trenches of achievement and talk not with people who are orchestrating from some lofty perspective, but to those high performers who are actually in the trenches, honing their craft. That has included guests from the worlds of business, sport, and entertainment, all of whom are on the front lines doing amazing things. Roland is a sports journalist and has spent many years covering the NBA. I want to be pretty quick with this intro because the last one was so extensive, at least compared to those that I normally put together. So if you missed episode 23 of Trench Talk, you can go back and get the full spiel there. In this episode, we talk Kobe Bryant and Roland's biography on the famous Laker called Showboat. We get into Kobe's attitude, work ethic, and a ton of other stuff on winning and his character. We also covered more on Michael Jordan, Phil Jackson, Roland's own writing career, and even a little LeBron James, Steph Curry, the Golden State Warriors, and the NBA. You can buy the biography Showboat, the life of Kobe Bryant, pretty much everywhere, including Amazon. To connect with Roland, head to Twitter. His handle, @Lazenby. Let's get to it. Enjoy my chat with Roland Lazenby. Roland Lazenby, thanks for coming back.
Happy to be back.
It's just gone, what have we got? 9 a.m. Wednesday morning here. I'm sitting in my home office in Melbourne, Australia. Where are you situated at the moment?
I am in Salem, Virginia, a small city outside of another small city, Roanoke, Virginia, which is about 4 hours southwest of Washington, D.C.
Very nice. So we're obviously doing this interview over Skype. Now, what currently sits on your desk, Roland, because you've come off a couple of monster book projects, being the Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant biographies. What are you working on at the moment? Are you ready to jump into something as big as those two?
I just edited Lindy's Pro Basketball Annual for the 24th straight year. And so that involved a good bit of my summer. Outside of that, I think on occasion about projects, but I'm in no particular rush to do one, and I'm not sure I'll write another book. I do have people approaching me about documentary films and things of that nature. I'm just taking my time to decide what I want to do.
I was half expecting to hear rumours of a book about LeBron sometime in the future from you. Is that on the cards at all?
Well, I've done a lot of preliminary prep work, and there's a very fascinating story about LeBron, his life story that really has never been told or fully explained. And I've done a lot of work on it, but I'm not sure.
Fair enough. Now, I watch your Twitter feed pretty closely, and your books have been translated into many different languages now. Have you been happy, surprised at the success of both of the books so far?
Well, I would have to say yes with the Jordan book. I've sort of been overwhelmed by, I think it's in 14 languages. I'm pretty sure that's correct. The Kobe book is scheduled to be translated into 10.
Wow.
Several of those are being done now. Kobe sells steadily and does well, and I've been very pleased with that. The Jordan book, even though it came out 3 years before Kobe, still sells every day, probably, 4 or 5 times as many books as Kobe sells.
Oh, wow.
Some of that is the subject matter. People are truly fascinated by Jordan. Some of it, I think, has to do with the fact that the Kobe book was published by Little Brown during the American presidential election last October. And it sort of got buried in just an avalanche of negative news about the American presidential election.
So would you hold that in the future if that came up again?
Yes, I was not pleased that my publisher wanted it done in 10 months. I just thought it was ridiculous. It ended up taking about 13 months to do, and it was very, very difficult to write that book on that kind of deadline with all the research, and it was really sort of crushing. I'm still trying to recover from it.
How long was the time between when you finished The Life and then began Showboat?
I finished Michael Jordan Life came out in May of 2014. And I began the Kobe book the very next February. So, and I had a lot of promotional activity to do. And then I also had to write the proposal and work with the publisher to develop the book. Even the time, there was no downtime, basically. And then I had to rush in and work 14-hour days, 7 days a week for 13, 14 months. The day I finished the Kobe book, my older sister died. She was ill, did not know how ill. And so I was pretty angry with the publisher for having shoved that schedule. I don't think it was necessary.
Well, that was my next question. Why the rush? Because you covered Kobe's last game, which you predicted so well. We'll get to later. But why the rush? There wasn't a need for it, I guess, is what you're saying.
Well, I think the book could have come out this spring or summer, and it would have been fine. Maybe certainly this fall would have been good too. And there are a lot of things that happen in publishing deals. I don't understand them all. It's you have decisions made by people you've never met face to face. Sometimes it's hard to understand. Sometimes you have major things in your life that you'll never understand, and why a particular group of people chose to shove me through those circumstances, I'm not sure. I think they felt the need to get it out. I'm not sure what their needs are. Publishers are international conglomerates. It's not a touchy-feely business. If you want the job, you've got a certain amount of time to do it. And so I'm belly aching a bit. I was very lucky to have the work, but it's ridiculous to do a major biography in 12 months.
Setting aside the time constraints and pressures that you were under, which was your favorite of the two to put together?
Both were incredibly difficult. And both, the Jordan book I did in 3 years. And I've always had tremendous energy, always able to work 80, 100 hours a week and do it for weeks on end. I've done that, I've done that for years. But the pressure with these large biographies is worse than on the other projects. And so I got exhausted twice. I got completely exhausted during the Jordan book, and I was able to recover and finish the book, and I got exhausted again finishing it. And then I bottomed out with utter and complete exhaustion on the Kobe book. And the Jordan book, I had more time. The pressure was great, but it was fun. And the Kobe book, there were things about it that were fun. It's always fun to discover and understand a person you're writing about when you're writing biography. It's always fun to do the interviews, to learn all these different things, particularly if it's a very public person that the world thinks it knows, and then suddenly you're able to piece together everything and put it in order, and the narrative often changes on the life of the person you're writing about. There are things that no one knew, and they become available, and you realize that you think one way about a person, and then maybe you need to think another way because you didn't have the correct facts.
Has your opinion changed of Kobe since completing that book?
It has. There are all kinds of people who help you with the book, and quite often they have agendas, and you have to set aside their agendas just to tell the story. And sometimes, even when you're aware that people have an agenda, it can cloud your judgment, and sometimes that happens. But I don't think that I came close to understanding Kobe Bryant until Sonny Vaccaro, the kingmaker in basketball, the shoe company executive, came clean on everything he did to make Kobe Bryant turn to the NBA as a teenager. And that totally changes the narrative. It wasn't, the world assumed that Kobe Bryant was demanding that he become a pro basketball player right out of high school. And also that Kobe was demanding to go to the Lakers and had all these demands. And as Sonny Vaccaro explained, none of that was Kobe's agenda. That was all the agenda of Adidas. And it was all the agenda of Sonny Vaccaro, who was trying to gain vengeance against his former boss, Nike. And he was trying to gain vengeance against American college basketball because the NCAA, the governing body of college basketball, had made Vaccaro's life miserable, and had investigated his dear friend Jerry Tarkanian at University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And so Sonny Vaccaro, this man who has known many secrets, really spent a lot of time with me explaining the whole evolution of Kobe Bryant's pro career right out of high school in Philadelphia in 1996, how instead of Kobe endeavoring to be a pro, Kobe Bryant, for the most part, like any kid, any sane kid in that era, wanted to go to college. But his family, one of the things that was not known is how badly his family, Kobe's family, needed money. And so their big plan was to have him turn pro. And of course, Adidas and Sonny Vaccaro paid him millions to turn professional. It was really the first case of a shoe company coming in and offering a whopping amount of money to a high school kid to become a pro.
Kobe it's a fascinating part of the book. Kobe was basically a pawn at that time of his life, moving between his dad's, I suppose, vision for him, their money issues, and then the part that he played for the shoe companies. Did you ever get the sense that he didn't want to be forced into that position? I mean, I know he said that he did want to go to college, if I remember correctly.
Right. I think some of the amazing things are that Kobe was dramatically manipulated by the shoe company and by his parents. And he bore that in silence. He became incredibly angry at both the shoe company and his parents. And when he was a pro in Los Angeles, right in the midst of some of his biggest games, winning championships in the playoffs, he threw his family out of his life. And he also threw Adidas, the shoe company, out of his life, basically. Paid lots of money to get rid of Adidas and just totally, and no one knew this. He did the whole thing in silence. This went on for years. There would be some small Twitters or whispers about it. I don't want to say Twitters. People get that confused. But there would be some talk about, not much. He really kept the whole thing to himself. Even the guy who was advising him psychologically, George Mumford, did not know these things. And it really is astounding, the family story in which Kobe just reacted to everything in his life.
And the reaction was to kick everybody out, right?
Yes, and become his own man. He married. His parents were not pleased with his fiance, and Kobe just moved them and his sisters out of his life. They've had small bits of reconciliation here and there, but that's been more than a decade now. Actually, about 16 years that he has eliminated them. And he did it over a weekend. Sold the house that they were living in that he had bought for them. He had their cars towed, the jobs that he had created for them in his business. He shuttered the business. It was really, as Sonny Vaccaro said, it was sort of like the Russian Revolution, where they got rid of everybody.
I've noticed this a bit, actually. How many pro sports contracts now include kickers and income or some sort of compensation that goes directly to the family members? And then by extension, how many of those are all kicked out by the time the second contract is on the table? Because there seems to be a bit of a trend there.
There can be. Not every family situation. In fact, I don't know of many that end as severely as the Bryant, as Kobe ditching his family and essentially removing them from his life. But, lottery winners, forget athletes for the moment, just lottery winners have a very high rate of failure. It is, it's immensely difficult not to have money, but to suddenly have large amounts of it, and the tremendous backwash of friends and family, everyone in the field around you has great need, great financial need, and they all want to be taken care of. And most professional athletes have a pretty substantial payroll. Many of them family members who do nothing for them, but receive major annual income from them. I've talked with, I was sitting doing some day drinking with LeBron James' uncle.
Oh, wow.
He would suddenly been called to LeBron's house that night. This was last spring. And he was sitting there just worried as could be that LeBron was calling him over to take him off the payroll, because Terry is, by his own admission, a really rough, tough street guy. And, he has said and done some inappropriate things over the years. He's a good-hearted person, but LeBron's Uncle Terry is, I think that he's emblematic of a lot of families. And you have people who are on the payroll, and it's always, well, I will say this: in basketball, in American professional basketball, there's so much money today. It probably means there's less conflict, because the players who are making 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 million, they're making so much money they can take care of a large number of people and perhaps not have their own circumstances challenged. But that's a brand new situation. For years and years, all the family members and hangers-on and different people in an athlete's life, they could create a lot of difficulty for athletes.
Be a tough situation, I would have thought, because you really do have a choice about who and if you bring people along for the ride with you. And I guess you do need to bring some people, otherwise you leave everybody behind and end up a loner, as Kobe did for a lot of his career.
Well, Kobe's mother was the protector. She was extremely focused on Kobe's money. And they had in Philadelphia extended family, cousins and siblings, her siblings, different people, grandparents, who all sort of anticipated being beamed up with the Bryants. The Bryants lived well, but once Kobe began making his money, they began living that exotic Hollywood lifestyle, and there was their friends and family in Philadelphia became resentful that the Bryants did not take care of them, so to speak, and bring them into that realm. And so it's a difficult thing. It's a difficult decision for these families. Back when this was happening, Kobe was, the money, frankly, was much less. And his own father, Joe Bryant, had played 8 years in the NBA and 8 years in Italy and Europe. And he was not broke, but he was headed there when they made sure Kobe got to the NBA so the family could continue to live that lifestyle. And so the Bryants had seen their well-being threatened. One thing they did understand is that they liked living that lifestyle, but they also knew that it could be threatened because it was very expensive to maintain that, to keep it going.
And they ultimately had to downgrade significantly, right, after Kobe cut them off, and then they were forced to move home.
They live in Vegas in modest housing today. At the time they had to return to Philadelphia. They still had the house there. But and the sisters who worked for Kobe had to give up all of their perks, and they all had to give up those unlimited credit cards, and they had to find work.
How helpful were Joe and Pam Bryant, Kobe's parents, to you in this project? Were they forthcoming with information? Did they want to help you?
No. They helped some through an intermediary.
Okay.
And there were things. I think they probably liked the book. I have not heard a whisper about it from Kobe or his family. I know that I had a lot of their friends and people they've known for years who helped me with various parts of the book. Obviously, you have to have a lot of help to write a biography. And I've gotten a great response. And that's not always the case. You do a biography on someone, it's tough. Michael Jordan shook my hand after I did Michael Jordan, The Life. But I don't think he was elated. No one wants to have a biography written about them. It's sort of like having an autopsy performed while you're still living without anesthesia.
I guess that they would understand that sooner or later it was going to happen, right? I mean, they don't have to like it, but if you're of such interest to the general public, somebody eventually is going to go with a documentary or put pen to paper or whatever.
Right. Michael Jordan, when I wrote the major biography about him, there'd already been dozens of books. He was literally a genre unto himself. No one had ever really done the deep dive on the family. You really have to go back and understand the DNA of the family when you do a biography. You really have to understand what motivates a family, what shapes a family, and all of those things to really begin to explain people. And I've come to believe that, and a lot of basketball fans like this. There's another group of them that are very impatient with it. They want to go, just get me to the stats and the basketball talk. I don't want to hear about the grandfather. But these relationships, to me, help explain the competitor, the competitive personality, the mindset. And it often resolves a lot of the mystery about particular people.
What was the major difference in terms of mindset between Kobe and Michael, if there was any? Because they were certainly both driven and hardworking and at the top of their game, incredibly successful. Was there anything that stuck out as really different in their approach?
They were very hardworking. Kobe, even more hardworking than Michael. They had tremendous similarity. And so a lot of the differences tended to be physical. And you've probably heard some of these. Michael's hands were larger.
Bit stronger, his balance, yeah.
Right. His ability. Kobe had developed an outstanding post game. But they both had their own very different but incredibly strong determination, this iron will. Michael was a complete unknown. Kobe was a partial unknown. Kobe's father was obviously an NBA player and a talent. Michael was some kid off the coastal plain of North Carolina from a family that on the surface was not distinguished publicly or anything of that nature. But both of them possessed of just unbelievable ambition. But their stories are different. I think the biggest difference is that Jordan, for his part, as he once explained to me, and I think I've told you this before, timing is everything. And Jordan had this perfect timing. Michael Jordan created the world that Kobe Bryant inhabited. That's the way I would say it.
Yeah, my understanding of the situation was that Michael created it, but then Kobe was, he walked that path that Michael created, but he was also the best of his time at leveraging all the different aspects of that.
Perhaps Michael's been pretty good at leveraging it without appearing to really do so, but he has. And so it's not a cut and dried thing, I must say. I think I tend to think of Michael as an alien. He landed here in a spaceship, and so as Earthlings, we look around and think, well, this is an interesting alien. Is there another one? And along comes Kobe, and we say, oh, there are two of these. And not exactly alike, but certainly pretty close.
Did Kobe in the end play for too long?
I think he played too hard. And they were worried about it a lot. Phil Jackson and his crowd, of people worried that he overtrained, he trained too hard. But that was his trademark. And I think Michael was going to work hard, but Kobe was going to outwork you. And that really was his competitive edge in so many ways. I don't think he was as talented as Jordan. Now, other people would disagree. I think Kobe really, really, really had to work to get it. He was marvelously talented, but to get to that level. Jordan created that world, as we said a few moments ago. He created the world, and most people just shrank at the idea of trying to live in it. And Kobe was this guy who not only wanted to live in it, he wanted to obliterate it.
And did an incredible job in the end of doing that.
He could never eclipse Jordan, but it wasn't for lack of effort.
My thought was that he actually stayed those last few seasons just so he could surpass the point total of Michael, which probably says a lot about his character, if that indeed is the case.
Right. In the summer of 99, as Michael was deciding, I'd spent a lot of time that 99 season. It was a shortened season by NBA labor trouble. But I'd spent the season mostly with Kobe and the Lakers. Michael had said he was going to quit. And so I was going to sit down and interview Michael. It was at his golf tournament. And I asked Kobe if there's anything he wanted me to ask him. And Kobe said, yeah, I'd like to learn about math from him. And I thought that was funny, and so did Michael. When I mentioned it to him, he said, yes, I can teach him about math. And, of course, math was scoring.
Yeah.
How do you average, what do you have to keep up every quarter? How are you going to produce constantly those big games? Kobe had a couple of 50-point games in high school, and he was intoxicated with that, and obviously wanted to do a lot more. And in a lot of ways, the book Showboat is about Kobe chasing that intoxication of being a volume scorer. And of course, Michael, in a lot of ways, is viewed as sort of this organic creature, he is what he is, a Popeye kind of figure. And that I think where Kobe has gotten a lot of the grease or the negativity in his career, in that he was not viewed as entirely organic. He's trying to emulate Jordan. He was caught up in that he was derivative of Jordan. We don't like that in our rock stars, and I guess now it's a big thing in our athletes too. They not only have to be good, they not only have to win, they have to bring some sense of originality. There was a lot of resentment. I remember covering Kobe as a young player and writing about him, and there was a lot of resentment that he was quote copying Jordan. And it began to bother him. He became very sensitive about it soon. When he was young, 18, 19, 20, you're oblivious to those things. And Kobe has acknowledged that he was extremely narrow-minded and short-sighted as a teenager. But then again, aren't we all?
Yeah, so true. Michael's advice, maths advice, was that as simple as 4 quarters of 8 points equals 32 a game and you'll probably lead the league in scoring, or was there more to it than that?
I'm sure it's about as simple as that. There are certain things about a rhythm, and there are intricacies they never bother to explain to the sports writers. And I don't think it's calculus. I think it's basically just math. Addition mostly. And I think that there is a complexity to it in the sense that they're competing. It involves everything they have to compete, and they're very good at it. And Michael and Kobe did form sort of an exclusive club, and they like to hint at these things and joke about them. But they really weren't too eager to bring the rest of the sporting world into the conversation. And they had lots of talks over the years, phone calls, whatnot. Years later, I was interviewing Jordan. He gave me about 30 minutes in Orlando during a pre-draft camp. And now this was in the spring during the playoffs. And then I went to Los Angeles to cover the Lakers. And I've mentioned this a few times, but I told Kobe, we were in a locker room, and I looked over at him and I said, I've been talking with MJ about you. And he just immediately snapped around. These guys don't pay a lot of attention to the things sports writers say. And he went, really? What did he say about me? It was sort of like his ears perked up, like he was a little kid wanting to know about, what Michael had to say. And so they're human. They just happen to be very, very good. And they have this ability to be so intriguing that large numbers of people spend money to see their games, to watch them on TV, to buy their shoes and their trading cards and jerseys. But it's still, the math is basic human stuff.
So one of the things that I found most interesting about them both is their great ability, I think you wrote, to compartmentalize different parts of their life from a mental sense. So how does one kick their family out over a weekend and perform so well in the playoffs at the same time? That's a tremendous ability to focus, I guess. Is that what it is?
Right. George Mumford had been the mindfulness expert for the Bulls, a psychologist, and I'd gotten to know George really well when during Michael's last 3 championship seasons. And then I went to Los Angeles, and I decided Kobe was a kid, but I decided, I did a book on him at that young age, adjusting to the NBA. And I wanted to because I'd seen the way he had all these post skills. He was this guy. He had his own it factor, and just as Michael had an it factor. And I recognized that and wanted to write a good bit about him. And I wanted to introduce him. He wanted to meet Tex Winter. I was rebounding free throws for Kobe in 1999, and he told me he dreamed in a dream that he would play for Tex Winter, and he would like to get to know him. And one of the things that had happened is that Tex Winter and I had become good friends. Tex was such a pure spirit, and I arranged for them to begin talking in phone conversations. And I was also eager for Kobe to meet George Mumford. In fact, the Lakers were in Houston. I was traveling and covering them. And George, at my invitation, came to Houston, and I introduced him to Kobe before game. This was before George went to work for the Lakers and before Phil Jackson was hired.
Right.
And Kobe was stunned that the Lakers would spend all this precious practice time on meditation and things of that nature. But I was eager to have everything I'd seen Michael have. I was eager to introduce that to Kobe. And it began with Tex Winter, included George Mumford. And, of course, Kobe considered both men. He considered George Mumford one of the most important people in his life. And he considered Tex Winter, Yoda, his mentor. And so it was interesting. He embraced all this strength. And George, of course, taught Michael mindfulness, the whole process of being in the moment, of building what Phil Jackson called that muscle of the mind, that discipline. And Kobe at first sort of, was standoffish about the mindfulness up, but he came to embrace it with tremendous passion. And it was the process, the ultimate display of it. I think this shocked George Mumford when I began writing the book and told him what I was learning, he had used the mindfulness to compartmentalize, and Kobe was not casual about his family relationships. The Bryants were an incredibly strong family unit, and they were admired in Europe. They were admired in Philadelphia. Wherever they went, people thought, that's a family. That's a family I admire. Pam Bryant was this very special person as a mother. Joe was this very engaging man. The girls were talented in their own right. They were top athletes. And then Kobe was the youngest, this prodigy, and they were admired. And it was a gargantuan task for Kobe to amputate them. And he used mindfulness to sort of cauterize his grief and to stay in the moment. And Kobe is a person of ungodly discipline. And he was able to use that strengthened mind to have the resolve to do this and to not show it to anyone.
Does he still work with George Mumford today, do you know?
George Mumford enjoys a very warm and special relationship with Kobe and Michael. But it's not as if George Mumford is in their rat pack. You know, he's not in their entourage. I hesitate to use the word posse after all the trouble it caused Phil Jackson, but he's not in their group. George Mumford is an author. He is a much sought after speaker, and he has done things with both Jordan and Kobe. They're brief things, but both men have made it clear to George Mumford their appreciation for him.
I've heard you talk in previous interviews before that one of the common things that you noticed in the lives of people who produce an extremely high level of success is the mothers who are perfectionists. Do I have that right? And does that remain true coming through the process of both these books?
Well, I think the competitors themselves, and Tex Winter talked lots with me about this, the great competitors are all perfectionists. Now, their mothers are some variation of that. But yes, they're all very different. Jerry West was this incredible perfectionist, was miserable about it. And his mother, in a totally different way. And she was very cognizant of it and spoke of it. And both Michael's mother and Kobe's mother, in their own right, their own way, are very extraordinary women. They are very human. They have their flaws, but they're not just regular mothers. These are women who've had a profound impact on their sons, and some of it negative, some of it positive. They've had to share conflict with their sons. It's one of the interesting things that's sort of there as you catalog these great competitive minds. This relationship with driven mothers, driven in different ways, but still driven.
And they both had the ability to cut them out at certain times, right? And to let them back in a couple of occasions.
Jerry West and his mother. And I've done 3 full biographies. Phil Jackson, I did a biography too. That's a 4th one. But the 3 guys that I've written about, I've really sort of kicked out all the stops. I guess they're sports biographies. They are. But they're really just the stories of the families. And truthfully, at some point there, I've always enjoyed learning basketball, writing about it, coaching it, playing pickup ball for a number of years. But I really became more into the family and the impact. And so I wanted to expand what I was writing about. And I certainly did that with Jerry West. The book I did on Jerry West, called Jerry West, for ESPN, it came out in 2010, I think, maybe 2011, but I think 2010. You know, I went back a couple of hundred years into West Virginia history, the state of West Virginia in the United States. And with Jordan, you know, that book begins with the birth of his great-grandfather in 1891, and the life of his great-grandfather is a big part that, again, people love this stuff or they hate it. But mostly the people who read the book love it. Dawson Jordan, Michael's crippled great-grandfather, who was 5'5" and crippled from a young age, and just a tough guy, a moonshiner, a sharecropper. And readers love that guy. They love that figure. And, you know, he had a huge influence on Jordan in his own way. He died when Michael was 14. But these backstories, I do note similarities, but I sort of let the stories go where they will. And it's not any formula I want. I just want to get the whole mojo working in the family and see how the different elements sort of slice across the competitive agenda for the star, you know, for the subject of the biography.
I think the first third of your book on Michael, if you didn't know who the subject was, most popular person on the planet is probably not where you'd predict that one of their kids would end up, right? But that background is fascinating. I actually went back. I sent a message or whatever it was to you earlier this year and retraced a few of those places and went and checked them out and that and had a great time down in North Carolina looking at some of those things.
Well, that's great. Glad you did that. You know, my purpose there was very specific and willful. I wanted to, you know, by the process of being the Nike figure that he was, this godhead of global sports marketing, Jordan was divorced from his African American heritage. It was not, you know, America is sort of growing in racial consciousness. And in the 1980s, while you're inhabiting that period of racial consciousness, it seems to be high. But when you look back on it, it's almost childlike in its lack of understanding. And so my goal was to connect Michael to his heritage and to allow him to claim that. And in a public sense, you know, Michael can claim whatever he wants. He doesn't need me to do it. But to make that connection publicly, and Michael has this great love for his family, and it was a good connection. It was one that was important.
You mentioned Phil Jackson before in the book that you wrote on him and his career.
And he had that same mother. Again, Phil's not a very talented athlete in the NBA, but the NBA is a league of a few hundred freaks from around the globe, people who are freakishly athletically talented. Within the NBA, Phil was no great shakes, but if you compare him to the standard population, he's an exceptional athlete. but in the NBA, he was sort of a stiff. But he was supremely competitive and had a mother who was the same, Betty Jackson. She was a fundamentalist preacher. Johnny Bach, the Bulls' assistant coach, liked to point out that both of Phil's parents were tent preachers, which was a lower status in the hierarchy of American religious sectors. And but Phil had that same kind of mojo working with a mother that was quite a figure and had a huge impact on his life. He and she used to play board games, and both of them just off the charts in terms of competitiveness.
Did his stint in New York, does that put a bit of a dampener on his career?
Obviously. The good part is his career was so successful early on. He was so worshipped. And it makes him quite an interesting biographical study, because he became so reviled in New York because the Knicks are so frustrated and the media is so ravenous and predatory, and Phil so unconcerned with all the public stuff. I don't think he ever got a handle on just how angry he was just oblivious to that. Phil has always sort of lived in his own world, as most coaches do. The NBA is a very insular little world. The irony is Phil was one of the guys who was more in touch with the rest of the universe than most of these other crazy coaches. They're all lifers. They can't even tell you the weather on a given day. And Phil was the guy who read books and engaged in meditation, but he ended up pissing off the fan base in New York in almost a biblical sense. It was so profound, the anger he created in his fans.
He risked that in LA and in Chicago, though, in some ways as well, though, didn't he? It's just that the cards sort of fell differently in the fact that they were so successful, and I guess if you're winning, it helps.
Well, first of all, he had tremendous athletic talent. He was coaching. He had Tex Winter, who virtually did everything for him. He was the coach. He controlled the players, and thus he could thumb his nose. He could shoot the bird at the franchise. He could make Jerry Krause miserable or Jerry Buss frustrated. Phil could do those things. He had a power that no one could touch. But in New York, he was an executive. He wasn't coaching the team. He wasn't directing the most talented roster in the history of the game in some ways, and or at least with some of the most talented players. And so he didn't have that power. And he never really had power or control over the Knicks organization, even though he was president. The Knicks organization was going to do what it wants. And he couldn't even select or get his choice to head the Westchester Knicks, the development league team. And so he was always sort of figurehead off in his own space. Meanwhile, the fan anger just kept boiling. It makes me think of all the royalty who sort of frittered away their power and influence in World War I. All the archdukes and the princes, and the world lost its mind because these guys they did not really see what was going on.
There seems to be that temptation of trying to do it one more time, right? Whether it be Kobe, Phil, or Michael, I suppose.
Right. And, of course, Phil cashed some very large checks for his time in New York. He did good things in some ways, but the fan base was just and the poor triangle offense became the whipping boy for all of this. It was tough.
Well, that's gone. That's gone forever now. Is that a fair statement?
I don't know. You can win with it. It's hard to say. We're in an age right now with the NBA where you have a guy like Steph Curry. You have a team like the Warriors. And you have the emergence of pace and space. Run up the floor and chuck up a three-pointer. Doesn't matter where you're shooting from. If you're a great shooter, it's fantastic. The only problem with the NBA is that there's only one team, the Golden State Warriors, who really have been able to take what they do and play the game that way. Everybody's trying to emulate them, but what we have are a lot of bad shots it's a league with a lot of young players, a lot of very young players in the league. The NBA has become highly speculative. And so they're all trying to play like the Warriors. A lot of them look very bad trying to do it. And so we'll see. Right now, it's a movement driven mostly by one team. You can say the Houston Rockets. They've got Mike D'Antoni. He's the pace and space guru, and he's their coach. And I don't think I've seen it. His teams, Phil and Tex used to laugh at Mike's teams because they always folded like a bad souffle in the playoffs. And there's all this hype about the Rockets, and they were a bad souffle. I mean, that was the worst ending. I've been doing this a while. That was the worst ending by a major team that was supposed to be competitive that I think I've ever seen. I don't think I've ever seen a team collapse that badly in pro basketball as the Rockets did in last year's playoffs.
Well, actually,
if I you could think, but I'm not convinced that other teams can play the way the Warriors do and be such good defensive teams. And really know how to play because, the Warriors are coached by triangle guys. Steve Kerr is a triangle man. And it uses a lot of Texas principles. He has a deep imprint on Steve Kerr's soul. And so I think the jury's out. I think the Warriors can win with it. They've won two. They've got a long way to go to be a dynasty.
I saw the Rockets play in the playoffs when they went to Oklahoma, which I think might have been the only game that they lost in this series,
right,
up there this year. And I was surprised at how much they rely on James Harden. I know he's a very good player, but it's the way I saw it anyway, it's a total opposite of the likes of the Bulls and the Lakers that have been so successful in the past.
Right. Of course, the triangle forces you to not be a ball stopper, that the ball keeps moving and everybody gets to handle it, share it, move it along. And it's not always perfect. Michael stopped it. Kobe stopped the ball. They both had their, their own little special club of the triangle. But I think the NBA will swing back. This is a long answer to your question. The triangle dominated pro basketball for basically 2 decades.
Yeah.
And it's an old offense. It's been around a long time. It has dominated women's basketball in America. The University of Connecticut and Tennessee have both used big chunks of it. I think the triangle has been around forever. The pick and roll, which is so big today, is one of the oldest offenses. The Minneapolis Lakers with Jim Pollard and George Mikan ran the screen and roll, the pick and roll to death. It's an old offense. And so these things stick around. Alan Bristow played at Virginia Tech. Howie Shannon, Tex Winter's assistant coach for many years, was hired at Virginia Tech in the 60s. He came in and he brought the triangle. Nobody knew what it was. It wasn't in the paper. The triangle gained notice because of Jordan. And so Alan Bristow played at Virginia Tech for Howie Shannon and then this offense. And Virginia Tech had been very mediocre, but suddenly they turned around. They become very good. They go to the NCAA tournament. Well, fast forward, and Alan Bristow goes on to play and coach in the NBA and become an executive. And so about 10 years ago, I'm talking with him in Charlotte at Orlando at our pre-draft event again. And I mentioned to him that, you played in the triangle in college. And he stops and he looks at me and his jaw, he sort of has this gaping look on his face of disbelief. And that's just typical of every guy coming along playing basketball. The coach has got some crap he wants to run, and they run it. They don't think about it being one thing or another. But Bristow was a triangle player in college, and he didn't even know it or wasn't even aware of it. And so I only throw that out there because Knicks fans have acted like it's, I don't know, the level of misunderstanding that came out of Phil's tenure in New York, that'll take a while to heal. But basketball uses everything. There are at least probably a dozen NBA teams using a good bit of the triangle now. There's triangulation everywhere. And they all those tricks that were good. I coach with the triangle in AAU basketball. It's everywhere. You may not be running Tech's pure system, but you're running the pieces. You're using it to create floor balance, to allow your teams to get back on defense. And so it's alive and well.
Yeah, we hear a lot about the different elements of the triangle. That's for sure. Roland, just a couple of questions, and we'll wrap up because I know you've got other things to get onto. But so out of interest, questions just for myself. When you write, which program do you write in?
Microsoft Word or some version of it.
Okay.
I write a lot of times. I'll first do a draft. It really just depends on how fast I'm moving and how conscious I am of things. But sometimes I'll just write out the stuff on a notepad and then go back. It's sort of as a first draft.
How fast do you write in terms of like words a month?
Oh, I write huge amounts when I'm writing. It really just, writing is voice. I have a master's degree in writing from Hollins University, and the elevator version of that master's degree is that writing is voice. And you get comfortable in your voice and you're going to rock and roll. You're going to move right along. And, a big part of developing voice is reading your writing aloud to yourself. And then you get others to read it to you. My poor wife has had to read far too much of my writing.
My wife would say the same.
You're right. And it allows you to take out the extra words. You're connecting your speaking voice to your listening voice. And I think it is the tried and true, long-held fashion of developing narrative. Writing is talking, is speaking, is storytelling. It's all related.
I found a little trick with my iPhone to make it actually speak the screen, which is just a feature of the phone. And after you write something, to have it play back to you, it's like, oh my goodness, we could definitely improve on a few things here. So that's helped me get a lot more specific and conscious in terms of the volume of words that you use and where to cut where appropriate.
Yeah, well, I could learn legions of lessons in where to cut. I don't know how I've ended up with books that are this long. Always, and I would like to go back probably and cut, 100 pages out of them. I've cut a lot out of both books. Part of it, though, is that the backstories that I treasure so much are the places that are the obvious candidates for cutting in my books. And I cut the stories a lot. Gosh, I don't know how many pages I cut out of a life in the Kobe book. And I probably should have cut some about Joe Bryant, but I liked that story and I wanted to tell it. And so I did.
Another one, changing subjects for you. A question I ask everyone, Roland, just to get a little bit of an insight into you and your character. If you could have one law changed, what would it be?
One law?
Yeah.
Boy, that's...
Actually, I'll tell you what, I'll make it easier for you. If you'd like to see one basketball rule changed, what would that be?
Oh, I think the way they read the game, they allow the guard. You can't touch a guard anymore. They've killed the game of basketball. There's no hand checking. There's no bumping the cutters. And if they want to keep that, if they want to allow no defense, that's fine. And Tex pointed this out to me as soon as they made the change. But they didn't do that for the post players. Those guys get shoved around. It's very physical down in the post. But the guards, you can't touch a guard. You can't literally impede them in any way. And that's why we see all the games today resemble all-star games from the 80s where guys could just drive to the basket and shoot. So I would change and I would say, okay, if you want to make all this, and they're making lots of money by doing this, by letting the guards shoot all these layups. And so I said, if you're going to do that, then you have to let the big men roam free too. You can't touch them either. And so I would just, I'm not sure how to bring about social justice in the world, but I think tall players are in need of social justice. And I think that is something you could fix.
Fair enough. So you like that. You like the hard, the tough element of the game, and you'd like to bring it back for the small guys.
It got out of control. I think they threw away defense. And you saw it in the 2006 finals. They called all those fouls whenever anybody touched Dwayne Wade. They called, they just changed the way they call the game, and they've changed the game, and it's everywhere. When I coached high school basketball, we had bump the cutter drills. Every team had them.
You're learning how to do that well.
Yeah, and you don't have those drills anymore. It's, but I think if you're not going to allow the guards, if you can't touch the guards, then you shouldn't be able to touch the bigs either.
Fair enough. Do you have any book recommendations apart from your own that you like?
Yeah, just basketball books.
Basketball books, yeah. Obvious answer, right?
Yeah. David Halberstam's writing on basketball has always been my favorite. It's always been from the breaks of the game to his book on Michael. All of his work, in fact, I've always found very inspiring. There are so many. Terry Pluto with his oral histories of the early NBA and the ABA. And the only reason I hesitate to answer this is I'm a little tired, and there's so many good ones that I leave people out. You almost don't have to recommend Bill Simmons' The Book of Basketball. It's everywhere. There are books coming along daily. So many good books. The fun thing is just sort of to discover the great basketball books out there. I've been through so many of them over the years. The book on the Lakers Winning Time by Scott Ostler and is a fun book. It's an old book. It's hard to find. Phil Jackson's book Maverick is fascinating. But there's so many of them. I'm sort of digging myself a hole because I'm a little tired and I can't remember all of them right now.
Fair enough. Well, thank you very much for your time and insights. You've been very generous with me on a few occasions now. I really appreciate it. And I'm going to let you well, what would be finishing off your day, because I know it's getting late there. Thank you again for carving out some time and doing this. It's much appreciated.
Well, Matt, I appreciate your interest, and I wish you the best of luck.
Hey everybody, it's Matt again. Thanks for listening. Just a couple of things before you guys clock off. You can get all Trench Talk episodes at xrm.com.au/podcast. You can also sign up for other goodies at the same site. Just plonk your email in there and you are covered. That's X for X-ray, R for Romeo, M for Mike.com.au/podcast. If you really like what I'm bringing you, please head to iTunes, subscribe to this show and leave a review right there. And lastly, if you want to contact me directly, type the @ symbol followed by Mr. Matt Reynolds into your search bar and you'll find all the social links. Goodbye.